Hello, it's Noir Nerd with another coder review. In this episode I'm going to be looking at a little quick experiment I did with 3D CSS transforms. So I'll be talking a bit about those and just giving a broad overview of this little project I've done, which is it's like a cube, artwork cube with 6 artworks on like a dice. Called it 3D CSS artwork dice, and it's got some JavaScript, so you can basically select a random face and it'll spin around to that face of the cube. So we create a 3D cube and then spin it around when that face is selected. So without further ado, let's have a look at the code. Okay, so let's have a look at the code. So let's have a look at, well, before we look at the code actually, let's look at the actual end result in action. So this is the page you'll see. We've got let's refresh this quickly. So we have this dice. It's got different artworks on each. This one's just a self-portrait in my hometown actually. You got some instructions on the left here. I've just added this like black sort of circle with some, just for like effect really. And then the main thing that this does is you roll and it applies the transform, and then the dice rolls to a random face of 6 on the cube face. So it applies the transform based on, or adds a class based on, for applying that transform based on a selected JavaScript value. Value in the JavaScript. So and that's it really. It's sort of just a funky 3D CSS experiment, like I said. So without further ado, let's look at the code. Just boot this up. Not there. Make this a bit bigger. So I think we'll look at just look at how the HTML is structured a bit first. So all this stuff here is just boilerplate added. At the top, it's just boilerplate added from. I used to use HTML boilerplate in WebStorm IDE, so I won't worry about that. Obviously, you just got doc type HTML. That's just goes without saying. I've created a wrapper. I've added some grid CSS here. That's just for positioning, so it's not really anything to do with the cube itself. The main thing we want to look at is here. So we have div class scene. Then we have div class cube. We have 6 faces defined, which are all flat faces in their individual CSS. And then we close that cube. And then the rest of it's just presentational stuff for the page. That's about it for the HTML. And you'll see as it will become apparent as I show you the rest of it, these are basically 6 flat faces which they then apply the 3D transforms to. So give me a sec, we'll just close this. So the guide I used actually for creating the cube is just this from this site here, 3D transforms, Des and Row. So this just gave me the guide for how to create a cube. I just basically I modified the code a bit from this, but essentially what you're doing is you've got these flat faces, and you can create different shapes. You don't have to create obviously a cube, but you've got these flat faces which all flattened out would be just flat, and then you're applying these transforms. So let's look at CSS next. Let's get the CSS up next. Into presentation reveals. Okay, so this is some grids that I've defined for the layout. Not too much to worry about there, because what we actually want to look at is how the cube's created. So that we've got a scene here with width 700 pixels, height 700, perspective of 800, which is how like, zoomed in it is really basically. I've added some styling like box shadow and stuff, but you don't have to worry about that too much. That's more just for the background circle it created. Stuff we want to look at here really. It's got a cube, width 400, height 400. I've added this transform style preserve 3D. And then the transition is the transform 1 second, which is here. So how long does it take to apply that transform? And then the actual animation that shows when you so what happens is in the code is that basically in the JavaScript, which we'll move on to in a minute, when a certain face is displayed, it adds this class cube show 1, depending on which face has been selected. It's the 6 faces, of course, and then these transforms translate Z, which is the Z-axis, which is like this axis, and then you also want to rotate it as well. So these values are just derived from, well, obviously a little bit of experimentation to see what works. But these are the very basic values we need to get a cube working, or that will vary a bit depending on how big your cube is as well. And then we've got a cube face class defined, which is important because that's basically the CSS for each face of your cube. So wherever it's the 6 faces, each one has a standard definition in that sense. So this, like, I've made it 600. You'll see here these transforms are 300, so it's half of that. Yada yada. Initially I had numbers, so that's why I've got font size there, but you can disregard that actually. I was just doing that as a reference for myself. And then each cube face, I've just created, given each a background image, of course. These are just in the same folder. So just giving it a background image, URL, 1, whatever it may be. And then just background size cover, so it covers the whole face. And then repeat. Okay. And then this is where we so for 1 we want it you'll see here we want it rotated node 0 degrees. No degrees, that's not really a word, we're saying it 0 degrees, and the Z-axis we want it 300. And I mean, you can, if you wanted to look at this, you can just copy and paste this. It sort of makes sense. Like you're just getting these cube faces and then mapping them out into a 3D shape. Essentially, what's going on there. So that's how you create the cube itself. And then we've also got this roll button element, which is just for the button. It's just a button styling, really. So use this button you saw in the example before, just styled up with a white background, some margins, yada yada yada. Let's have a look at the JavaScript now, I think. And then I'll just talk a little bit about what's going on there. So my example, I've got just my JavaScript, just put it in main. That's all there is. Okay. Enter presentation mode. Okay, so first thing we have is the query selector, which selects the class of cube, which is important because that's the class which we'll be adding the show classes to actually apply the transforms to rotate to the specific face we want. So that should make sense. Roll button, which is the button, just so we can apply the on-click event. So there's the listener, an event listener that listens for a mouse click, which is down here actually. Roll button, add event listener, type click, and then run that function roll dice, which is our main function. We've also got this function get random integer, which is for determining the minimum maximum. So we don't want it more than, it needs to be at least 1 and no more than 6. So we've got minimum ceiling, math floor max, and then this just returns a random number based between that maximum and minimum values. So I hope that makes sense. If you don't have familiarity with which way round is it again? I think seal is rounds it down. I think floor mat rounds it up. Let me just remember. Smallest integer greater than or equal to its numeric argument. Okay. So when the onClick is clicked on the roll button, which is just the button element we have on the page, we instantiate a variable called random number. We run this function get random integer, passing in 1 and 7 as the minimum and maximum value. 7 I've done because we want to be able to see 6 as well, and it rounds it down, I think, anyway. I can probably do that another way, but that's just how I did it. And then, very important part here, we have variable show class, which defines what actual face are we going to be showing next. So you just have a string passed in with show hyphen, and then whatever random number's been generated here between 1 and 6. And I've done a little console log so I can just show it as well, which is mostly just for debugging purposes. Probably wouldn't want a console log in there if you had a real running thing in a production environment, but as this is just a demo, I've just left it there really. So if there's a current class, the cube's class list, we want to remove the current class, because if there's say if you had 4 and the new random number is 6 from the click, you first remove 4 and you want to add 6, so that's why that's there. And then you add to the class list show class, which has been defined here. And then the current class is now show class. And that's all there is to it really. So I hope that makes sense. I'll just go back to the CSS and show exactly what that show is doing. I don't know if I've covered it enough. So we've got, there we go. So these are the transforms that are being applied when those classes are these are what's being added basically to the class for the cube. So the translate and the rotate. And then as I was showing you before, in action, what that looks like is, let me just get this working properly. Bada bing. So let's have a look in the console as well, just so we can show what's going on in the background, because we've still got the console logs in there. So if I want to show 5, so that's face 5, show face 6, and it's just applying that class basically. Okay, so I hope that's been interesting in some respect. A little bit of an overview on 3D CSS transforms. I'm sort of new to 3D CSS. I've not really done a great deal with it so far. So it's a new area for me. I hope you found it interesting. I'll be Noir Nerd. Like and subscribe if you like my content. Usually it's tutorials, code overviews. Yeah, have a good one. Hope it's been useful. In a bit. Au revoir. Do svidania. Poka poka.